Hello, thank you for checking out my channel. My name's Butch, and I like to build ball joint dolls and their accessories. I've come up with a method that lets me quickly and easily build a ball jointed figure using polymer clay. I've made some molds for joint beads and a skull bead just to speed up my building process. I have a bead making video in my playlist in my videos. I use polymer clay to build up a core instead of aluminum foil. I find it works better to build a better socket joint, and I can always carve away most of it after I've done curing so that I have just like a small little block to start with. This allows me to build the clay up on top of it to what I actually want it to look like finished. Now when I'm carving it away, I'm not worried about making it perfect looking. I'd rather worry about making it symmetrical or balanced. It is, after all, just going to be a core. I like to use the skull that I've casted for all the faces I make. It's made it so that I can actually concentrate on increasing my skill at making faces better. I'll let it cool in the mold for a bit while I go on to making something else. I actually go to making my hands pretty early in my builds. I usually just start with like a mitt shape with a good thumb, and I like to make it so I could almost hold something with the mitt. I do end up cutting these fingers off, so I don't worry about putting all the details in the fingers. Having it in the mitt shape though does allow me to position the thumb and where I like the wrist to join in better. Now that the skull's cooled up a bit, it'll actually pop out of the mold, keeping most of the details. Again, it's just a core, so I don't worry about having it 100% perfect. Here I'm going to use a little bacon bond on the bar. Put it on the bar so that when I wrap it with some polymer clay, that it'll actually stick to the bar without deforming too badly. I make these as like a spacer for when I'm building the arms and the legs. It helps me keep their lengths the same for both left and right side. They're not hard to make, it's just you don't want to squish it so that the bar becomes uncentered from the blob. Once it's a cylinder, you want it so that that hole goes through it and has an equal thickness on each side. Here I'm making the core for the feet. I pretty much just make a foot that looks like it's a sock. I like to use a shape and cut it in half so that at least both my feet are somewhat symmetrical in length and thickness, and it just makes it easier for me to shape both the feet at the same time. I like it when I can do parts where I can pick one up, put the left side down, and pick the right side up, so that the polymer clay doesn't get too warm. I like it when it stays a little on the stiff side. It starts getting gooey, it can be hard to shape and put any details in. I have a habit of working on a little bit of everything for the doll. I don't just start with a torso and then go into the legs or start with a head. I pretty much work with everything systematically at the same time, mostly because I like to deal with the colors. I like it because it makes it like a paint by numbers at the end. I also have made a couple aluminum foil jigs so that I can have different feet sitting at different angles. Makes it a lot easier when you go to make heels. I do a lot of female characters, so heels seem to be a reoccurring thing. Because this character has one hand that's gauntleted, I'm going to make its red hand at this point too. I do have a tendency to build a lot of red parts when I have red out, black parts when I have black out. I just find it's easier and keeps the colors better. More importantly, when you start working with a lot of like clear colors, like translucents, or red and then go on to white, yeah, you'll be wondering why you get some pink. Now, I do end up making multiples of these colored tubes that I use as spacers. The reason is when I build an arm or a leg, if there's a black boot and it goes into flesh or say a pair of jeans, I do like to separate so that the inner tube is the same color as what I'm going to be working with. Here's an example here. Her boots will be red, but she's going to have some black understockings under them, and the flesh at the top. With the gloves, because there's going to be red at the bottom and flesh at the top, I find it works better. And you won't see any colors when you have the joints moving around. I have everything foiled up here. I wrap the beads with foil so that when I put clay on top of them to form the bead sockets with those beads, that they don't get cooked or cured to each other. And this is where it comes handy where I had the jigs for making my own beads. Because all my beads are have a standardized size, I can use extras for wrapping in foil. Here I'm just building up the torso. I'll build a basic upper body, just enough so that it will become a shaped core. Most times I'll layer things up about 3 times before I get to a finished shape and put any clothing or anything on. The first core sets your size. The second core actually starts setting your sockets. Your third will give you your shape and your definitions. But this making a good socket right now is instrumental in making it so your doll actually moves well later on. I can always go in after and trim this back also before I lay my final layer of polymer clay on to give it all the shape and definition I want. Now, anytime I'm sticking clay down, I'm always using a bake adhesive. I like using it when I'm attaching raw clay to baked clay. It makes it like one piece when I'm done. I also do really like having a little bit of that glue there when I'm wrapping it around. It just helps that seam line disappear and it meld in a bit. The best thing about baking on a bar like this is you know that the joints are going to fit perfectly because you're using the joints that you're going to run in the doll anyways. You don't have to worry about fingerprints because you don't have to hold on to the pieces. You have the bar to hang on to. And you don't have to worry about flat spots because when I go to bake this, I'll just put the bar in a block that has them standing straight up. Most times, all arms, legs, upper torsos, they come off these bars ready to go after drilling out for the elastics. They really require very little trimming or sanding. Any trimming I usually have to do on the arms and legs is just to help increase range of motion. But I can do a lot of the fine detailing while they're on the bar, including little ornaments and stuff like that. And I'll even leave them on the bar when I get to the stage of painting. Just so, again, I don't have to handle anything. I really like this method, and it really does, as long as you're not taking everything off and on, and you just leave it on from the start to the finish, really makes it so you can produce one of these dolls very fast. Now, I am by no means a professional at making these dolls. I am still quite a novice. I think this doll here is actually like my 9th or 10th. When I got interested in making ball-jointed dolls or my own custom action figures, I couldn't find hardly anything online for somebody who just wanted to do everything from start to finish without customizing another doll. So I started looking into the ball-jointed doll world, and there wasn't a whole lot either. A lot of the videos were way too long for me. I wanted to see something start to finish. And most of us, we just need a good idea on how things go. So I decided to make longer, more complete doll building videos. I wanted to show how simple and easy it actually is to make one of these. It's not complicated. I made this doll in a little over 40 hours from start to finish, from scratch. At this point right here, I could assemble this doll, but it would make it a complete bugger of a pain to try and finish it. But all the pieces are here. If it were all just flesh tone, it would be a perfect body blank actually, at this point. This is when I have to resist temptation myself. At this point though, it's easy to put all the little details on. And again, I don't have to handle anything. Everything's on the bar, so anything small I'm going to put on a figure now, I don't have to worry about smushing. And as long as I use some bake adhesive, I know that it's not going to come falling or popping off. At this point, I've got about 14 to 15 hours wrapped up in building this ball-jointed figure. Here we're going to go into building the hands. You can try drilling out those little fingers afterwards, but I found it easier just to fold a thin piece over a needle or a nail and just let it bake on it and pull it out after. I like to use a pin that's just a little thicker than the pin I'm going to use as the stop pin after when I'm done connecting everything. Here I'll mold in all the little fingers and make it all grippy looking. Because when I said I cut the fingers off those mitt hands I build, I replaced them with this. And because the two sheets are folded over the needle, it leaves a round back to it. You'll see why I didn't take the fingers all the way to the needle later when we get back to this piece. While I'm into the flesh though, I could make just a dimple where the eyes are and then paint the eyes in. But I actually have a little jig that lets me make little polymer clay eyeballs. You can use liquid clay and bake it. I just use regular polymer clay and stick it in there and pull them out. But I like to bake them in so that my eyes are already there. And then I can just little equal pieces left and right and start building up around the eyes for the eyebrows and the cheekbones. This method of building these little pieces up on the skulls definitely made it easier for me to refine the process and my skills at making a decent face. That's been quite the challenge so far. Because I work with the translucent clay, it really doesn't like to have fine paints and stuff put on it. So most things I try to sculpt right in place. Eyebrows, any makeup like eyeshadow and that. You almost have to make it with the translucent clay and put it in place just so it looks proper. I'm always working on my face sculpts and my hand parts. They're going to take the longest for me to get better at. But I can already see a noticeable improvement. So it makes me excited to see what my 100th doll will look like. I love when people leave comments. My favorite aren't the great jobs. I love it when somebody asks me how I did some. I have no problems giving up any of my tips or tricks or secrets. And I'm always looking for another video to help other people learn what I'm doing. I'm always also interested in what people would like me to build. I've got 100 different dolls in my brain I'd like to build. Some are complicated, some are simple. Some are inspired by things like FNAF, others by the Gresham Impact, but I don't follow any of that stuff well enough to really make a true character for any of that. I can make something inspired by, or maybe you might be interested in seeing a body type, like if I build a ball-jointed rainbow high body, or a monster high body that's ball-jointed entirely from polymer clay. Here I'm sticking some polymer clay to a foot, and I'll leave it. There's a little bacon bond on there, and if you set it aside, the bacon bond will almost do half that melding for you, and it'll keep it in place real good. I like doing the cuffs without setting it aside, because where I need to blend in, that bacon bond will actually help smooth it into the already baked clay. I do use a lot of bacon bond. I find scissors actually for some parts to be better than using a knife. I like it because it crimples both sides and not just indenting one and giving a crisp edge on the other. For the soleless shoes, I really find this looks really good. One of the tricks I've found with polymer clay is you don't want to have to muck around with it too much. You want to be able to drop it in, make it look like exactly what you want, and then get out. My first characters were a lot simpler, so I've actually tried to increase the detail I do with each build. Even though some of the dolls don't have a whole lot of details on them. Making the fingers for the red-handed glove is the same as doing the skin-colored fingers. Wrapping that polymer clay around that needle makes that nice, smooth, rounded back that we're going to need when we make our articulated fingers. Doing some shaping before I cut some fingers in. Having these fingers done makes it so that I almost feel like I'm halfway done the doll. Because now I have feet and hands, and I literally could assemble this doll right now, because even the face is done. Making sure we don't take those fingers again all the way to that needle that we have. Eventually we gotta drill a hole, and a little slot will have to be cut in so that we have a place for it to accept our elastic. This is actually going to be our anchor point for the arms. One of the best things about using the fingers as the anchor part for your arms instead of a hook to the hand is that it allows the fingers to actually open and close, which actually lets you have your fingers hold things. Unfortunately, it makes it so you cannot pop the hands off and on. Now when I do my heels, I like to make sure that that heel is going to be a nice height so that the foot can stand flat. One of the criteria for my dolls is that they actually have to be able to stand on their own afterwards. It's amazing from how many doll reviews I've watched on like the action figure type, how many of the dolls don't have flat feet, especially the female characters that have heels. One of the things I took away from watching the action figure unboxings was the criteria at which they liked and didn't like from figures. I love that with polymer clay you can bake some parts and then add them to unbaked parts. These are going to be some knee pads, but I don't want them to get all deformed when I stick them into the knee parts. So I'm actually going to make them and bake them before I stick them in. It works great for not smushing tiny details before you get them in place. This character's accessories, like her shoulder pad and sword and stuff, are so simple that I'm just including them with the doll build this time. Here with 3 wooden beads and some masking tape, I'm going to shape and cook her shoulder pad and do all the details on it right on this. It'll even be there when I get to pretty much paint. This I didn't put any bacon bond on because without bacon bond, polymer clay really doesn't like to stick to anything. This shoulder pad's going to move, but it's not going to be removable. With already working in red, we're going to work on down to the bottom half of her boots. She has like this cloth trailing stuff that goes down to her ankles and over top of her boots, so I'm going to put all that in right now. I do love working with the colored clay because it almost makes it look finished even before you get to doing any paint. When I get to paint, it's mostly just washes. Again, here I'm able to do a whole lot of detail work without leaving fingerprints on everything. Here's that eyeshadowing she gets. She has some iconic 80 eyeshadow, that's for sure. And like I said earlier, translucent really doesn't like to be painted. So I actually just use polymer clay. A little translucent mixed with a little bit of color and you have instant eyeshadow. I actually think I got her scowl pretty good. Now this character has some weird knee pads that kind of flip up at the top instead of going up the thigh. And they have this round knee pad. That's what you saw me bake earlier. Here I'm just cutting them to make that flippy part so it comes up and it kind of wraps around the sides of the knees a little bit. Now I do really like to try and, when I have to make symmetrical things, I'll make 2 of something at the exact same time. That way I know everything's the same length, same thickness, and I do find it easier if I have to trim shapes that I can duplicate it by looking at the other. Here I'm just sticking the knee pad in place and making sure that the legs are pulled apart so nothing bakes to each other. And now the cover part on the top of the shoe will pretty much finish up the legs for building. A little bit of detailing, making sure I have my hole punch for where my bead will be set it in. I actually have a little bar with a bead that's been wrapped in tin foil so I can stick it right in there. There's a tiny hole that goes through that foot to the heel, so now I don't even have to hold on to the foot while I do any of the small details. I did say I was including the sword and the shoulder guard in this, and that includes a scabbard. I take a little tape and I wrap it around the popsicle stick I've trimmed down to be the sword blade. And I'll wrap it in the polymer clay first, even before I build the sword. And I'll leave that masking tape in there that has a little coating of bacon bond so that it'll act as my sheath. The sword will actually draw in and out of it. I usually make the sheath a little longer than I need to because it's actually quite easy to trim it down after. Polymer clay trims nicely. Now with all those parts out of the oven, I'm pretty far along, but we need to put an outfit on this girl. It's not much of an outfit, a lot of black straps, but it's an outfit nonetheless, and we need to put it on. One of the things I do like about trying to recreate an actual character is it does push my skills in trying how to get their outfits to look right. I have been asked the question before, why do I sculpt the clothes onto my figures? The reason? I can sew, but if my wife finds out I can sew, I'll never get to make another thing for myself again. No, I can make the clothes on the figures a lot quicker, and I grew up with action figures. And I like the idea of making a toy, an action figure. I could easily make a doll, just a blank, and then build soft goods to clothe them like a regular doll, but nobody does action figures. And I grew up with action figures, so it's what I'm most comfortable with, I guess. Although I do know if you're watching just to see how I build the doll and not the clothing on top. 12th scale ball joint dolls, that's kind of hard to find how to build them online. And that is basically what I'm building here, is a 12th scale ball joint doll that is capable of doing stop motion animation and standing on its own and holding things, kind of like an action figure. The waist bead is about the only place in my whole construction where I actually have to do any amount of sanding. Everything else is pretty much smooth going with no sanding whatsoever. Now I figured out a long time ago the easiest way to make a little sword is to actually just make a little sword. Make the guard, make the blade, make the guard so it slides onto the blade, and then put a handle behind the guard. I'll use wood most times for the blade, just because it's thin, I've got it on hand, but I have made dolls in the past that actually have working weapons and working armors. So when I'm making the swords for my figures, I have a tendency to make them like you would a real weapon, just smaller. Now this waist actually had some channels that I carved in for this strap line to go into, so that when the doll moved around, the strap kind of continued underneath into the ball joint. Every small detail you can remember definitely will help. Here we'll match up the sword guard to the sword, and we'll start making an accessory. Usually I'll make an accessory video for a character, but this character already had a big accessory video to go with it, that I figured the shoulder pad and the sword, because you couldn't take them off the character, should be included with the character. Making medieval style weapons for my characters actually comes pretty easy to me. It's something I actually like to build on my own. I do like it when I can make characters that their weapons are real, but when I'm making them like a toy, I figured the weapons might as well just be toys. I also like to make armors for my characters too, and sometimes I can get carried away. I guess I'm kind of lucky that this character's weapon was relatively simple. But sometimes, simple is all you need. Now when I go to do the hair, I will wrap the head in aluminum foil like I do the joints, so that I can make the hair right on top of the head itself. If I do it this way, I can actually have multiple different hairs that can come off and on one head. We'll start with a round head cap, usually in the base color of the hair I want, and then I'll lay down some thin pieces and just score them a lot with the razor blade, just so they have some hair patterns in them. I do have a tendency to build my hairs more like if they were hair welts, where I start at the back, at the bottom, and work my way up and then up to the sides. I have tried making my hair in the anime kind of style where it's all swooping and almost fluid looking, but I just don't have a knack for that yet. I do mean yet. I will keep experimenting with that because it is a look I like. One advantage to doing the hair this way though is it's easy to make it swoop and have areas underneath tassels, and once you get going at it, you can get everything to kind of just flow nicely. Now when it comes to the hair, I think I may eventually try to get some cosplay, some of the more flexible material. The premo works pretty good. It's a little bit forgiving, but some of the really fine hairs can be a little on the brittle side. So I try not to leave anything out and on its own. I always like to have it a little chunky looking at least. It just adds to the strength. One thing I'm definitely going to do is I'm going to take and standardize a sculpt so that the roundness in the back and across the top and the forehead is all the same for all my different figures. I think this would be really nice so that when I do make hairs, I could actually let all the different girls play around with each other's hair. This figure though is only going to have the one set of hair, but I am going to leave it so that it can come off and on, so if I want to make some windswept hair at a different time I can. When I make a figure, one of the things I always try to do is figure out how I'm going to make their hair. I do try to make them a good representation of what I'm going for, especially if it's an already known figure. Then you have to really be careful about which ones you choose so that you know that you can do their hair at least. Even though I'm going to paint the hair once it's all done, I do like to work in the colors. But when I get the hair finished, I almost don't want to paint them because I'm always afraid of hurting it or ruining it. And so far I've always found paint does make everything look better. But knowing this, you have to exaggerate some areas so that when you do paint, and I like to use washes, that it has somewhere to sit in that will make the hair look like hair. Now that we're ready for paint, we're going to be so happy we left everything on these bars. It really does make it a very easy thing to paint. I've taken the aluminum foil off the face and just wrapped it with saran wrap for the hair. But as you can see, I like to paint a base coat of the color it's going to be. Like here I'm painting a base coat of the white, and then I'll do a base coat of the lavender. I find that it helps the polymer clay. It paints all you need if you're worried about sealing it. But this is just so that my washes and further paints will actually be smooth when I paint it. I find it the first time you put any paint on raw polymer clay after it's been baked, it almost drags. The paint really doesn't flow the way you want it because the surface isn't really smooth, it's slightly porous. So sealing it up with the paint will let you move the paint the way you want to on the piece. Now anything I've made of cloth good, like here it's actually hockey tape with glue, I will paint that to seal that fabric tape. It actually accepts paint very well and will seal it. Now I've sped up a bunch of the painting process, not so fast that you can't see what I'm doing, but we're just basically painting all the pieces with the same color they are. If they're red, they're getting painted red. Black's gonna get painted with black, and so on. This is just so that my washes pool the way I like them to, instead of staining the polymer clay. Now for paints, I don't use any expensive paints. These are the Folk Art craft paints from Walmart. About $3 a tube. I use a little bit of acrylic flow improver. I get that from Michaels. But other than that, everything's really basic. That's one of the things I love about building these characters, these ball jointed figures, is they don't cost a lot. Like Cost me 3 small square packages at Michael's of my polymerclay, a little bit of paint, a lot of aluminum foil that I recycle. So really it doesn't cost much to make one of these. You can make one for about 15-20 bucks. And my favorite part about it is there's almost no waste because you're not doing a lot of cutting and sanding. I don't have to breathe in any dust. I've really come to like making my figures this way. And it doesn't only have to be for a 6-inch figure. This exact method can be used on a 9-inch doll, a 12-inch doll, no problem. Now, one of the best secrets for painting something metallic is to paint it black first. I don't know what it is, but that black paint underneath will help gold and silver look gold and silver. Now for the red, it's just a mucky, almost brown wash that I'm using on it. And it's pretty runny. I just want some pooling to happen in the crevices. And make sure I get the sheath too and the shoulder guard. Anything that's red will get hit with this same type of mucky wash. And that will help unify all the pieces. But the pieces being on the bar really does help keep your fingers clean. This black wash is going to make all the hairs in that white hair and the lavender hair really look separate. And it's going to add a lot of shadows. But if I wouldn't have painted first, that black wash would have stained that white. And it wouldn't have painted over the same way as easily. Here you can see where that black wash actually stained the white paint. With a little dry painting with some foam, I'm able to leave all those crevices still black with just painting the top of the white. So it really makes the hair look nice. It helps everything pop. After the wash dries, I'll go back in and I'll paint in a bunch of the red so it highlights where I didn't want it to get so dark. Most times I only hit something about 3 times with paint. I hit it with a base paint, a wash, and then I'll go back over with the highlight paint afterwards. I don't believe in doing anything real complicated with paint. It's just kind of my motto: if you make it difficult, problems will jump up. I like being able to work the hair like this when it's not on a body or anything, just on the stick. Putting in these little highlights, it really makes the hair pop, and it actually looks more like what I was trying to sculpt. Some of it will be painted over, some of it will be little wisps added in. That first coat of gold though, when it went over that black, it did a really good job. One more coat, 2 coats total, and it's amazing how bright it'll actually become. One of my biggest tricks when it comes to painting is, once everything's been painted, I'll preheat my oven to my polymerclay cook temperature. And once it's all preheated up, I'll put my pieces in on the bars like this, and I'll cook that paint on for about 4 or 5 minutes. The paint I use is non-toxic, so I don't have to worry. Drilling the figure out has got to be one of the most time-consuming tasks I do when I build my figures. You can't rush anything, you can't force the drill bits through faster. You just gotta let the process be the process. When you try to get rammy and push and make it happen quick, that's when parts will crack. Now when you're drilling out your parts, I find it best if I just let the drill go all the way through. You'll be tempted to drill half from one side, half from the other. But what can happen here is you don't have a straight line through. you can actually make a bowed drill path. So drilling it all the way through one side, then flipping it over and drilling it all the way through the other side, I find this ensures having a perfectly straight hole. Here I'm using a Dremel bit. It's a conical rasp. It's great for chamfering the drill holes, softening the edges, and making it so that holes are a little bigger for when you start drilling. Now I do have a tendency to start with a small drill and work up in size. That's what takes so long. But doing that, progressively working up to another drill bit, a bigger drill bit, and a bigger drill bit, I find this keeps pieces, especially small pieces like the hands, the forearms, it will keep them from snapping. I do have this bigger drill bit. I use it to open up the inside of the chest cavity. It just allows for a little more movement when you go to have the crunches. These are a pair of steel wires. They're actually guitar strings, and it makes it really easy to feed through the holes. I like the guitar strings because they don't bend real easy and crimp, but they have flex to them. I prefer to drill one piece at a time. This is a test fitting elastic I use. It's put together a dozen dolls now. But I find if you drill out one piece at a time, you have less problems and you can fit things then. It gives you a little time before you go on to the next part. It's also important when you string a BJ doll that you keep your left elastics on the left side and your right on the right. You don't want them curling up inside the doll because it'll mess up your tension. Now, to allow for movement, we need to cut slots in some beads to allow the elastic to move in and out. Here we're cutting a slot for the thigh bead. I just drill a couple little holes up the center line, and then I just clear out the material until I get a nice smooth passage through. I use one of the bars that I build with just to see how smooth it is. If there's any jagged spots, things will get hooked up. And once the chasm is drilled out, I'll drill a slightly bigger one at the bottom. It won't go all the way through. This is going to hold a little peg. It's actually a stir stick. It's hollow, but it'll act as a peg to go down into the thigh so that it makes it easier to control the leg. Now, drilling out the hip piece, you really don't need that big a hole or that big a space. You just need somewhere for the elastic to go up into the center of the torso. I like to keep them real close to center. Some people put them out farther, but I find if I keep them close to the center line where they come in, it just helps draw the legs into the hip socket and keeps them from being all floppy. I will drill out the hip just enough. I hate to over drill them. This bigger bit, I'm just using it to kind of chamfer where the two actually meet. Because now there's actually a Y hole down in here. You have to make sure when you're threading it in that your left elastic is going to be on the left side and your right elastic is on the right side. Because if not, what's going to happen is your doll's going to want to constantly spin at the waist and turn backwards. I have a hook that kind of hangs out that lets me support my elastic so I can actually have the doll hanging while I assemble it. And with the hip beads in, everything's kind of locked up right now for a little bit. But it's a great time to make sure that all the movement is the way I want, that the beads, that the slots I've carved into them aren't catching or gripping on anything inside the socket or on the edge of the socket. Because if something catches, it can cause a crack or a break or flake a chunk off. So it's a great time to make sure that everything's moving smoothly. Using a test elastic is great for this. Plus, I have to have the doll almost fully assembled to figure out how long I need to make my looped elastic afterwards. And this gives me just a prime time for both. Now the thighs, once they've been drilled through, at the top is going to need that extra little bit drilled out to accommodate that peg that we've put in the top bead. Test to make sure that it swivels on that. You don't want it tight. And then when it goes up, this way when you go to move the leg, the thigh will actually control that bead instead of the bead following. It helps my character stand and position, and I find it really makes the waist beads stay stiff. It's also a great time to see if anything's sitting lower than another. If one thigh was sitting a little lower down to the knee than the other, sometimes you can switch to 2 hip beads, and it can help compensate for that problem. Constructing the knee bead is kind of like doing a double hip. There's a ball on each end, so once it's been drilled out, I'm going to drill just a few little holes up the center line so I can carve a chasm down each end of the bead about halfway. This will let the knee joint pivot and move. And just like on the hip bead, I'll test both the top and bottom bead on this knee to make sure that the passage is clean and everything can move freely. And while I'm stringing the bead, I'll make sure I have pressure on both sides when I'm sliding the elastic through, and if the elastic doesn't slide easily enough, drill the hole out a little bigger. You don't want to force the elastic through it because it can still snap. And the shin's just a straight through hole, nothing too special. And then I'll drill out the small bead that'll be in the ankle. Now when it comes to ankle and knee beads, I do have a tendency to drill them out as big as I possibly can, because the larger you can make that opening in the bead, the more movement that bead will have without having to cut a slot. For being homemade ball joint dolls, my figures really don't show a whole lot of the slots that a lot of other ball joint dolls do. Now when I'm drilling the foot, I'll drill that hole at the ankle fairly wide. And I'll put it pretty deep, almost to the bottom of the heel. Because we're going to drill a hole sideways through this, intersecting it like a T. And it's going to be a really thin hole, thin enough to just accept a pin. Now this pin is what's going to end up locking a loop into that bottom foot of the elastic. And it's actually going to be one of our points of attaching. This will be one of the pins that I put through. I'm going to cut it just long enough to go through, but not really see the other end out the other side. I like to keep the head on the push pin. It just gives me something to pull in and out with. But if you cut it without having a head on that pin and slide it in there, you won't see it when it's all joined. Some parts like her shoulder armor weren't going to be able to be put on and off with the character assembled. So I had to put it up on her torso before I put her arms on. Now while it was on the test elastic, I fitted it for the figure 8 shaped elastic loop I built. Now if you want to know how to build that elastic loop, I have a good video in my playlist that covers how I actually make those. Now her belt with the scabbard on it was another item that was not going to be able to be taken off on this character. A lot of the times I like to make it so their accessories can come off and on, but her character didn't have any buckles or anything, and I do like to try to keep them pretty close to the pictures I'm working from. Now at this point the doll will actually start going together pretty quickly. Here you get another good view of that bead that's got that peg out of it. Now the peg is just big enough on the inside that the elastic fits through and is just snug, but moves very freely. Now at this point I won't be so much worried about going side to side as long as I got both the hip beads in. I will actually concentrate on finishing up one leg. You can see here where I use these little wires almost like a sewing needle. And where they're pulling on that elastic, that loop, that is going to be the fixing point that we slide the pin through on our foot. Now, one thing I would recommend when stringing up these dolls is to get a pair of locking forceps. I got mine from the fishing department at Walmart. They were very inexpensive. And they are very much needed for doing this. They take a lot of the holding the elastic out so that you can get parts on, because they lock and they can have that little elastic nub hang out. Now you're going to see why I drilled out the hole in the foot as big as I can. That loop of the elastic, you don't really want to be flattened out. You want to stay a little bit open, because if it's a little bit open, it makes it a lot easier to pass the pin through it. Even with a wide open eye in that elastic loop, it can still be tricky to get that pin to pass through the opening. Now I just have to repeat that stringing process for the other leg. And once I put the pin in the other foot, the doll's torso and legs will all be joined together. Now, if you're wondering how I strung the elastic through and what the elastic's pulling on the neck, I make a neck bead that has a loop. Now, you'll be able to find a good reference to that in my bead making video. Now, you can do this stringing method without the locking forceps, but it is a lot trickier, and you almost want somebody to hold a pair of pliers or something closed while you're doing the finicky little piece of getting that elastic in the foot. And here's where I recommend having two pairs. If your elastic isn't up high enough, you can use the second set to kind of pull it up through. And I found if you magnetize one of the sets, it makes it easier for picking up and dropping those pins. But even with all that space and everything, sometimes it can take a little work to make sure that it just wiggles through. And don't try pushing it through like you would a pin into a board, because it will push right into the polymer clay. If you just kind of keep wiggling and searching, it will pop right into that hole. And this is why I love this method so much. Right off the bar, I haven't trimmed or fitted anything. None of the leg parts. The only thing that got any trimming or sanding was the waist bead. And even the sword slid into its sheath without any fitting. And figuring out the loop size with the other two arms still on the bar makes it very easy, because I can just slide them into the holes and see how long I need them to be. But that's still covered in my loop making video. Now we're on to the arms. The arms are no different than doing the legs. The shoulder bead is going to be exactly like a thigh bead. We're going to have to cut it, slot out so that the elastic can move. And I'll put one of these hollow pegs in it going down into the arm also. Now be extra careful when you're drilling and carving out these small beads. They are pretty tiny, and I do carve quite a bit of them away. Now I use this peg in the upper arm for the same reason I use it in the thigh. When you go to move the arm, at least now the arm will control the bead instead of the bead just kind of following behind. I do glue these tubes in so that they don't pop out, but they're usually pretty stiff to start with. Now when I put one of these posts in a bead, especially when it's this small, I actually prefer to carve the space for the elastic to move around in after I've actually pushed that tube up in. If you have the slot already carved and you go to do it, there's not a whole lot there, and they'll more than likely crack. With the peg glued in, at least it's solid there and the crack isn't going to continue all the way down. Then it's a matter of drilling all that part, starting with the smallest drill bit and slowly working up in the size until you get to just big enough for that post that I've drilled and glued into the shoulder can sit to that arm piece and move around freely. You don't want it to be stiff there, just secure, but you want it to be able to spin around easily. When I'm putting my arms on, I'll usually string up one entire arm before I actually put it on the body, instead of trying to string one side and the other. And the elbow beads end up being exactly like the knee beads. They have a ball on each end that'll need a slot carved about halfway down them. I like having it on the bar when I'm locating my centers because the bar runs right through and keeps a straight line. I'll drill a few tiny little holes so that I have something to just carve out and connect to. I like doing this method than trying to just carve the slot itself. It keeps it thinner, and I find it keeps them straight. Now when I'm stringing the arms, the parts are so small that you really don't want to have to force the elastic through. If it's not big enough, drill it out a little more, carve it out a little more so that the elastic moves freely through. It really sucks to get this far along and then all of a sudden have a piece break in half. Now a wrist bead is like an ankle bead to me, and I will drill it out as large as I possibly can. The bigger the space is in that bead for those two joints, the less slot you'll have to carve, and you'll still get a lot of good movement without having a visible slot carved into that bead. Now we're going to come up onto the hands here, and when I'm drilling the palm part of the hand, I like to just use as small a drill bit as I can. I take it up ever so slowly. I don't try to force the drill bit through. I let the spinning action clear it, and I make sure I keep light pressure on the palm pieces so that I can actually feel if it might snap. If that's going to occur, I'll take the drill bit back and even go back to a smaller one. Because we cut the fingers off the mitt, where that straight across flat spot is now, we may need to make a bit of a groove in there so that that rounded part of the back of the fingers that we made can actually rest in that groove and act as a fulcrum for it to pivot on. I will drill this just big enough for the elastic to pass through without me having to force it. We'll feed the hand onto this elastic, and this arm will be pretty much done except for setting up the fingers. I'll put a toothpick in the eyelet so that it can hold its place while I put some tension onto the arms and see how well it moves now that it's all together. One of the reasons I make my elastics in like a figure 8 loop is so that I know where the middle is. But even without any trimming or sanding, like this arm has a way better than 90, has some excellent pivoting, and the wrist has a lot of movement to get some really natural looks. And the elbow is actually pretty locked up, it only moves where I want it to move. When I go to feed this in, I'm going to really try to get the elastic to go behind the ones that are already currently in the body. I like it to be on the back side and not the chest side, but it really doesn't matter either way. I just find it draws tension onto the body better if it's behind. Now, because I sew my elastics in a figure-8 shape, when I pull it through, it's really going to want to sit right in the middle. But again, first time onto the body, and it already looks natural and feels like it's going to move well. Now all I have to do is the other arm. Same as the other side. First we do a shoulder bead, exactly the same way as we do our hip bead. Because it's a smaller bead, I drill it out first to accommodate that peg that we put in, the stir stick. I just find it's a lot easier to glue that stir stick in first, then cut the slots, than it is to cut the slots and then glue in the stick. Most of the times when I cut the slot and then glue in the stick, I end up breaking the bead in half. But I found if I glue the stick in first, then when I cut the slot, I have a high survival rate for that bead actually forming. My high-tech sharpener from the fishing department at Walmart cost me a whopping $2. My finger cut keeps me from actually cutting my fingers up pretty good. Now we'll just trim and clear that slot out. I don't mind the small beads, they trim up pretty quick. Give it a quick test and make sure everything's going to move smoothly. Make sure the elastics aren't going to get hung up on anything. Cut our little tube to length. It doesn't need a whole lot of shoulder. And then drill the arm out so our hollowed out peg can fit down in, and like I said, exactly like the other side. And an arm is just a miniature leg really until you get to the hands and feet. Now you've probably noticed I use 2 hand drills. I'm not big on using power tools for this. They're too fast and they create too much noise and dust. I'm not a big fan of anything that creates too much of a mess. Half the time I'm doing this at my kitchen table, so I really don't want to make anything too messy or anything with toxic materials. Now something happened when I was filming the hand part, so you didn't get to see that for the red fingers, but I do know it's good for the flesh colored fingers. Here we're into the elbow again, which I'm just marking out my 2 holes for my center part for where I'll cut my little slit, a little chasm in the balls for the top and the bottom of the elbow. I do find it easier on the bar. I know when I hit the bar I've got all the way through, and it lets me help me keep them in line with one another so that when the joint moves, it moves straight instead of one part wanting to move wonky. Drilling and cutting the slots on a smaller bead is definitely quicker, so use a little extra care when you're doing them because they can also break a lot easier too. But because they're so much quicker, they're very rewarding. Now when I cut my slots, I don't like to cut them too big, because if they're too big, they'll allow for too much movement in the elastic, and you won't get them to turn the way you want them to turn. And like the last time, I made sure I got some pinching force on either side of that bead when I go to slide it up, if I can get the doll to stay up. And I also try to make it so that the elastic doesn't twist or turn while I'm putting it through it. The forearm, well, that's just a nice straight drill through. And then we're on to the wrist. Now when I drill out the forearm, I'll drill it out just large enough so that the elastic moves through it without being stiff or binding. And when I drill out the wrist, I will drill out that bead so that it's almost a little sloppy on the elastic, if the bead size allows it. The wrist bead's pretty small, so sometimes I can only drill it out as much as I can drill it out. These should slide onto the elastic with no resistance whatsoever. The gravity could almost pull them into place. Drilling out my hand is like drilling out the other one. I want to drill it out as much as I possibly can. I'd rather it be a little snugger on the elastic than loose. And when I'm drilling it, I'll keep some pressure on the palm pieces so that I can feel if the drill's starting to bind up or if it's going to try to jump through. Then I can slow it down just manually. That's the beautiful thing about using a hand drill. Now this little chasm where the hand's going to have to rest in, the fingers, a lot of times I'll carve a little V, and then I'll just take one of the drill bits that's close to the size of the rounded part of the fingers, and I'll just sand in a little groove for those fingers to rest in. And it'll be a little finicky, but you just sand a little bit, and you'll get it to where a point whereabouts when you test that finger to it, it will sit in that little cup and it will just move nicely. Now, when I cut the little slot in the hand, you're going to want it to be center where that elastic comes through the palm. Now, when we cut that little groove in the fingers, we start off by drilling a little hole just past the pin. Now, the reason we do it just past the pin is that elastic is going to need a little bit of space to move into when we make that loop. The backside of that loop is going to still be that thickness of the elastic. The reason for having the fingers square to that hole and this little hole that we carve in being right directly where that hole comes out of the palm is it'll keep the fingers in place. They won't drift down too much, they won't drift up, and if we keep that slot just big enough for the elastic without any room on either side, those fingers will stay in place very nicely. Now, the whole reason we wrapped that polymer clay around the needle was so that we didn't have to try and drill this hole here. That would have been really hard, it would have been really small, and it's easier just to form it on the needle. Now, I'm just going to use the needle that was formed with. There's one problem with that. When you snip the needle, it will make a little flat spot that makes it so the tip isn't the same size as the rest of the shaft. So instead of forcing it through, just twist it a little bit before you go to test fit it. And if you twist them, it will just help elongate that chasm so when you do go to put that pin in, it will slide effortlessly in. I've tried a bunch of different ways for anchoring elastics into these dolls, and this is by far the easiest way that I've come up with to do it, because it simply, you pop it on, you slide the pin through, you unhook your forceps, and you're done. Like, it is always this easy with fingers. And when I make characters with movable toes, it is equal as easy. And with that, we're finally assembled. Just pull on the elastics both sides a bit so the tension gets equaled out between both arms so that all the pieces will move properly, and construction is done. And this arm moves just as well as the other arm did, straight from forming off the bar, drilling. There's no sanding, no trimming, no fitting. Well, she's looking pretty good here, so I think we better put her in the spotlight. She hits all my criteria. The doll can stand, I can pose her, she can hold on to things. No, I'm quite happy with this build. Oh, she's got a weapon that works and looks pretty good. Not bad for a little bit of wood and polymer clay. Fits in the sheath very nicely. No problems there. Now, let's check out her range of motion here. She's got some thigh on her, so her legs are better than 90, but I could have made them bend in a little more. She has no problem doing the splits if you rotate the bead. Movement's pretty good. Now the waist will do pretty good. Most of them, the way I build it is pretty flexible. I could have increased it a little more, but you might have seen some of the hole in the bottom of the bead for the waist. Lateral movement's pretty good. Arm moves pretty well. Holds itself. It doesn't jump when you let go of it or want to spring back to a different location. It stays right where I put it. Hands got some good movement. Wrists. See that opening and closing? But there's no slot in that wrist. But it has a lot of movement. Now the gauntleted arm doesn't move quite as much. We have the shoulder pad that blocks it. But without the shoulder pad, it would move exactly the same. But because of the way the shoulder pad actually hangs off of her, a lot of her arm movement isn't hindered too bad. Only if she tried to reach straight up. Now, most of my characters do have removable hair, and she is no different. I might make her some more hairs later on. But with the head right now, you can see it's got some okay movement. It only has the base bottom bead movement. Because she has what I call a peg head, which means you can take her head off. Sometimes I won't make it so their heads come off, and they get that additional top bead movement also. But being able to draw the head off gives you a lot more options, especially if you want to put cloaks, switch up heads with different characters, make it a helmeted head for her body. So a lot of the times I'll use the peg for the head. Well, thank you for checking out my video. And if there's anything you'd like to see, or any questions you have pertaining to anything I did here, leave a comment, and I'll be happy to answer them. Till then, let's bring something to life. If you found this video informative or enjoyable, maybe give it a like. Possibly even subscribe. Get that notified. And then you'll see what else is coming up next.